Hello, you've joined us on Space Goat Coast to Coast. This is a TBC podcast where we talk about the Burning Crusade and both like Blizzard versions and private server versions. And I'm Searcher. I'm here today, and I'm joined by I don't know. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, what's up? This is ABAP. Um, Longtime WoW player. Played P servers classic since 2005. Yeah, love the game. Thanks for having me.
Cool, cool. And do you want to maybe talk a little bit more specifically about like what draws you to TBC while we're here?
Yeah, I always like considered myself like a vanilla player. I kind of like I don't know, like most players, kind of quit during like MOP and WAD. Went to vanilla private servers. I played like Phoenix, Emerald Dream, Warsong, Nostalrius, like all the vanilla servers. And then I played TBC for the first time on like Netherwing, I think. And I mean, after that, it was all just different for me. I just kind of fell in love with TBC. I mean, it's such an awesome game. Um, I don't know. I think it like captures like the vanilla aspect of like what makes vanilla WoW so great is like also makes TBC so great, and it just adds so much more on top of that. Like there's so much more fluidity with like the leveling, like the end game is just leagues better in my opinion. Um, yeah, I just love it so much. It's awesome.
Yeah. I think so. For me personally, when I was playing WoW retail, I started playing towards the end of vanilla, and most of my experience was playing TBC. So that's definitely part of it, right? It was my first real experience, like playing in the end game for sure, doing raiding, and when I really kind of started, I don't know, being an actual WoW player. Uh, and I pretty much played through the entire expansion without quitting or stopping. And when Wrath came out, there were parts of it I liked, but there were also a lot of things that I really missed about TBC specifically. Um, and by I don't know, over the course of Wrath, I quit a couple of times, and by the end of Wrath, I was pretty done with the game. It didn't look like Kata was taking the game in a direction that was really interesting to me. And what I think that I like the most about TBC is, well, I guess it'd probably be two things, but primarily compared to modern WoW is the way that classes function. I really like the idea of classes having a defined role and
Mm-hmm.
your class bringing like strengths to the raid. Like I play Druid a lot, so like having a battle res is like a really neat thing that Druids can do, and like having innervate and having that utility in the raid. Um, and the way that a feral druid can like fill the role of tank and DPS, by just
Mm-hmm.
switching gear and not needing to switch talents. Like things like that make druid feel really special. And I think you could have that same discussion about, I think, pretty much all the classes
For sure.
in
Yeah,
T.
I think like that's definitely one thing that makes TBC rating so special is like every class, every spec like brings something to the table and like you feel impactful
Yeah,
and
and
like
there
all the different buffs and stuff that every class is giving.
Yeah, and there's tinkering
It's
you get to
awesome.
do with those buffs, right? It's like, oh, well, how could we set up the 5 man group to like maximize and like that kind of efficiency? I mean, like I don't know. I do enjoy min maxing discussions. I think the way they've gone now, with like this like hyper focus on parsing, that's less fun to me. But like, the far as like what can we do given our situation, to like maximize their chance for success. I think that those are fun things to think about, and I also like
Yeah,
that there's not necessarily like a 100% right answer. There's many viable alternatives out there, so like I like that part of it. And then I think the other thing outside of classes that I really like is the attunement and progression process from normals, getting reputation to heroics, to unlocking the raids, with the different keys and quests you have to do. I just think
yeah,
that's a,
for
a
sure.
cool system, and it was something that was definitely left behind in later expansions. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Those things are like gameplay elements that I think are really fun and engaging. And yeah, it's funny because since then I've played on several TBC projects, which are like varying levels of quality. But the reason I keep coming back and seeking that is because I don't mind doing those time and time again because of those particular elements.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Like in my opinion, I think like the leveling to end game process in TBC is like unmatched in any version of WoW. It's so much fun.
Hmm.
Like just especially the leveling in TBC is so much more fluid than vanilla, and like then like what like the in-game progression as well. Like there's so much to do. Um it's just so much fun. And like one more thing that like I think makes TBC special as well is like like a lot of people say that like there's no world PvP because of flying mounts, but I disagree completely with that. I think if anything, the world PvP in TBC is like very similar to vanilla WoW. Like there's so many resources in the open world to fight over, which like we didn't really see that in classic because of like layering and limitations in the game. Like
Yeah, I think
uh
I totally agree. I think that the flying ruining the game gets way overblown, and it's like pointing to a problem that is not necessary, right? Like I understand how they're coming to that conclusion, but I don't think flying is necessarily like the root of that cause. I think there are other
right.
factors, and I think that being able to get around really fast means that when your friend is trying to pick that mana thistle, or you're trying to capture the center of Nagrand, like you can get there just that much faster than all of a sudden, on a populated
Hmm.
server, PvP definitely happens. Like there are things out in the world, and maybe the difference is unlike vanilla, where like you can't really choose to disengage. I mean, you can, I guess, hearth and return to town. In TBC, you can definitely like just wait people out in the air. But that's a game in itself, because then you got people who are trying to dismount and get you off your mount, and like that's a pretty high risk play, right? Like you can end up
Right.
falling to your
You
death.
might need spirit res. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, stuff like that I think is interesting. I'll totally admit it's different. But I think that it's a more nuanced argument than maybe most people
Hmm.
would allow for.
For sure. Like I think like the elemental plateau specifically is like very similar to like Ungoro Crater in vanilla, like with Devil Sword Mafia.
Yeah, at the start of a server that's populated enough, and with that has two strong factions, that is definitely an area that you could set up something similar. And on some servers I have seen, you know, usually smaller groups of people than the Devil Storm Mafia, but like really trying
Hmm.
to dominate that, and get all their primals that they need for those powerful crafted items early on. Cool. Well, we should probably talk about why we're having this conversation now, and a big part of that is because there is a pretty notable TDC server launch that's on the horizon. It is Felmyst 4, or also they've been calling it, the developers have decided to call this server Skull Crusher. And it is a project that is headed by, well, it's a server core that's been designed by Gummy, who is a pretty famous, if you follow the emulated scene, pretty famous developer for WoW private servers. But I don't know, in the last 10 or so years, he's really focused his effort on TBC specifically. And the Felmyst server, um, I don't know, it's definitely had an interesting history. But what I would point out, and like the reason that I'm excited about it, is because the server itself is scripted in a way that is different than most of the other servers. A lot of those servers will use, uh, I don't know, some kind of open source, or kind of called like a stock code base. And Gummy has gone through and really heavily edited one of those to a point where it's pretty much, I would assume, I don't know much about computer programming, but I think it's the way the server runs is pretty different in very substantial ways from those, based on ways that kind of spells work, and the ways that, I don't know, players interact with the game. And I mean, that's a whole bunch of technical stuff, but like the short of it is that the kind of 1 to 60 experience on Felmyst is basically the best that there is out there for TBC right now, and that a lot of the raid content is scripted in a way that's really true to the way it actually was back on retail TBC, in a way that I would say other servers are just starting to get to that point where they're nearly as good. But I would say Gummy definitely did it first, and in a way that made the content really challenging and engaging. So it was a really fun place to be. I don't know, Abap, what is your experience with Felmyst?
Yeah, I would agree. I think like the overall experience on Felmist is like way better than other private servers and even classic TBC. Like you can just feel the polish on the server, and it's very true to like the original game. Um, and
Yeah, and part of that is some design choices. Like
mhm,
when the game first came out, itemization was kind of funky, and Gummy has chosen to keep those not super well statted out items in the game. So especially at the
mhm,
start, they're I don't know, the classes are kind of balanced in a different way at the beginning of the game, and then as you get into later raid tiers, things kind of end up shaping up more like what we're used to seeing in classic WoW. For me, I think the big I don't know. My big complaint with Classic WoW, since we're kind of talking about it, is the way that the phases were laid out and keeping
yeah,
people in tier 4 for what it ended up
absolutely.
being like 3 4 months, like way 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 too long. When
Mhm,
initially in the actual TBC launch, T4 and T5 were available at launch, and why like Felmist so much is because when Felmist 1 launched, and was so popular that Gummy actually ended up shutting down the server, uh, because he stated that he got a cease and desist from Blizzard. There's a little controversy there. Who's to say what actually happened? Not me. It can be fun to speculate though. Maybe we can talk about that some other time. But Felmist 2 had kind of a stealth launch, and it was really just the Felmist 1 server that got reopened. It was the same characters, same everything, and he kind of just at the end of a YouTube video that he put out happened to mention that, oh hey, by the way, the server is back open, and the people that watched through to the end, or the people that were really invested in that server, kind of slowly started to log in and realize that they could play. And it was at a time when Classic was not out yet, but was like in talks. So WoW was on people's mind. People were looking for a good server to play on, and people knew that this was going to be a good experience. But I think probably the most fun I've had playing WoW was during Felmist 2, because it felt like a very uh, like it was a server that had a low population at the start, so like you knew everything that you needed. You were gonna have to work really hard for the social connections that you had on that server were really super important, because it's a game that you cannot get to, right? You can't raid by yourself, you can't get to the end by yourself, so like you need to
mhm,
rely on other people. And then that race to finish your tier 4 attunement and get to tier 5, um, felt you know it was just a really fun experience to play with a group of people that I was playing with. And then at the very end, we did have some competition, a little bit on the alliance side, but mostly coming from the horde side, which is obviously like this great kind of built-in rivalry to the game. And it was going to be fun to go into tier 6 with that, but unfortunately, uh, by the time that tier 6 was coming out, Gummy decided that the server was going to come down, and a lot of people lost interest at that point. But I mean, Felmist 2 was definitely just such a good experience that for any Felmist project, I'm always excited to check it out, and I hope that it's going to kind of live up to that experience with Felmist 2. And
mhm.
Abap, did you play on Felmist 2, or how did you start? Kind of.
Um, yeah, I did not play Felmist 2. I played like when Felmist originally launched for like the 6 hours it was available, but I did not play Felmist 2. Can't remember exactly what I was doing at the time, but I think Northdale came out shortly after. I was playing a lot of that.
Oh, cool. That's a vanilla
Um,
server, right?
yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
But yeah, I would like to add that like I think you were mentioning the phasing on Classic. I think that was a big reason why a lot of people lost interest. Like keeping people in Karazhan and Gruul and Mag for 3 or 4 months is insane to me. I mean, those are two encounters that are basically like an Onyxia. It's a
Yeah,
one boss, you know.
yeah.
It's so boring. There's nothing to do.
There's just nothing to do. And like, so what people did do was they leveled up all their alts. And something that Gummy is pretty adamant about is that GDKP has kind of ruined the the culture maybe of like classic WoW right now. Because it's all about like just playing the alt and like, you know, making money through playing raids or swiping your credit card to get the gear on all your characters. You know, and I think that maybe that's true. I don't know. I think I like the idea of GDKP as like an incentive for pugs to get together and perform well. Like I think you do end up having better pug grades with the GDKP incentive. But you know the
Hmm.
reason that's so popular is because there's not that much to do in the game, and then they spread out these phases like longer than they need to be. Um, so I don't know. I think that right if there was more end game content to focus on, and that was more of like a race to this to the next raid tier, then people would be focused like less alt focused, and as a natural
Yeah.
consequence, there would be
I
less
think
focus on GDKB.
yeah, like TBC Classic would have been way more interesting with like the race to kill Vosh and Kael'thas, in my opinion. I don't know. I know a lot of people quit in phase one of TBC Classic just because there's literally nothing to do, and it's not how the game was originally released back in the day.
Yeah,
It was literally just to milk subs for a longer period of time.
yeah. I mean, it does seem very like maximizing profit motivated, which you know I understand as a company they need to do that, but it would be nice if they right? I think that they could invest a little bit more and make players a lot happier and give provide them a better experience and potentially get more subscriptions, right?
Hmm.
If they were to do that, and I don't think that the investment on their end would cost them that much more. But I mean, I'm sure they're the experts and they have it figured out. But I don't know. It would be. I'm still hopeful that one day, right? Once everything's been released, maybe there's going to be more I don't know a better look at kind of like what they could be doing to improve the
Hmm.
experience because yeah for me right now I mean I hear my friends that are still playing Cataclysm because they like some aspects of Cataclysm and they played it back in the day so but like the way I see it them playing it is totally like well you know they don't care about their character they're just like playing their alt army and like getting into as
Hmm.
many raids as they can and you know that is the fun part of the game for sure but like there's other ways for the game to be fun too.
Yeah, for sure. I think a
Yeah
lot of classic players kind of have like a sour taste of TBC just because of the way it was done, which is
yeah
sad to me.
yeah I mean people are pretty vindicated and you know like oh hey, yeah TBC isn't that good of an expansion it's like well the version you got right uh was not the best it can be so
Hmm.
yeah so yeah Felmyst 3 um it was launched. Oh shoot, I have it written down somewhere, but I don't actually remember. But it was launched while WoW Classic was out. Like I guess after, like during was it was while Wrath of the Lich King was out, or
Yeah, I think it was during Old War, if I remember correctly, during
yeah,
Old War and Wrath.
and it kind of I don't know there there was a pretty significant rollback that tanked its popularity a little bit. But I think the main
Hmm.
reason that Filmus 3 didn't take off was because there was so much of the WoW crew who was still enjoying Wrath of the Lich King. That is an expansion that some people hold up as their favorite. Um, you know, I can understand where they're coming from with that. It's not I like some parts of it. It's not my favorite for sure. TBC holds that, but I think that's the main reason, probably why Felmist did not have end up with that same popularity that it saw in Felmist 2. And like Felmist 2 also had a small group, you know, it probably never had more than a few hundred people online at any one time. but Felmyst 3 pretty quickly had numbers like at 100 or less maximum
Yeah.
people online. So, you know, I guess it's still up, but because the interest wasn't there, it just could never support um, I guess the other thing we should say about Felmist, which we haven't talked about, is that the level of difficulty, because of the way it's been scripted, like heroics on Felmist are harder than any other private server by a significant amount. Um,
Hmm.
and Karazhan, while the mobs don't have more health and more armor like they do on some servers, which makes it take longer. The fights are scripted in a way that makes them actually challenging and difficult. And things are in more or less a pre-nerf state. Uh, it's hard to talk about pre-nerf state because some things were definitely bugs, but like I would say like it's in a not a bug-free pre-nerf state, and
Hmm.
yeah, so because of that, you definitely need a player who's going to be invested in the game, and wants to raid at like a pretty hardcore, I don't know, with a hardcore perspective, uh, and getting the amount of people together to actually do that. Um, I would say like Felmist 3 didn't have the population to actually support that, so that's kind of why it petered out, and now like no one really logs in and plays that server.
Hmm. Yeah, I would agree completely. I think, like you said, like um, with Wrath still being, I mean, in Ulduar, which is like everyone's favorite raid in Wrath, um, there wasn't a lot of interest, and also like there weren't a lot of I don't know, like high level guilds or players that had an interest because there were no guilds forming really pre-launch. Um,
Yeah, and
which
oh yeah, sorry, if you have something else, you can keep going.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's like necessarily like the end of the server, like just because there's no guilds forming pre-launch at all. Like we definitely tried to get something started, but there just wasn't, I don't know, there just wasn't enough players to form like a solid raid to like really tackle tier 5.
Yeah,
We definitely tried as long as we could. We did Karazhan, we did Gruul, but ultimately we were not able to like field a roster for Magtheridon and T5.
yeah.
And
I mean, it was, yeah. There's class composition. I don't know. There are problems. I don't think it's super interesting to talk about, honestly. But what I'm hopeful for with Fomus 4 is that with Wrath being over, and I think some people I think really enjoy Sod, but I think that there is I think that's kind of lost its initial popularity.
Mhm.
So I think that there's definitely a player out there that is looking for a really good, maybe vanilla TBC or Wrath experience. And I think it's players like that who are going to be drawn to Filmist 4. So I have hopes that not only will Filmist 4 have a more popular launch than Felmyst 3 and even the Felmyst 2, I think that also the caliber of player has a higher chance of being better than it was before, right? Like you're going to get those people who played TBC Classic and learned a lot about the game, who might want to come back and play that expansion that they really enjoyed on Classic despite all those other problems we mentioned.
For sure. Yeah, I think the timing's definitely right in terms of capturing players from Classic for Felmis. Um, I mean, there's nowhere to play for like vanilla or TBC gamers right now. There's Cataclysm, there's Sod, which is basically just Cataclysm and vanilla content, and there's Era. So and most people don't care to touch Era at all.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I don't
so
know. It's interesting. There is one person that I know online who I'll tune into his Twitch stream, and like multiple times a week, he's raiding Nax on different characters with like 40 people, and like they're all Dark Moon Fair buffed out, and like I don't. It's I'm impressed that there's 40 people who uh, are showing up for that week after week, and just doing that same Nax raid every time. That's not something I'd be interested in doing, but I don't know.
yeah, no
I
shot.
I I I could see myself doing that for TBC though. And I think it's, I don't know. It's funny about why I see it being different, but like a 40-man raid versus 25-man raid, it's your impact is greater. You like whether or not you perform is not like a question of like, did I parse in a 99 or 98 percentile, but did I do my job? Where
Hmm.
there's less of that in Nax, especially if
For
you're just
sure.
like one of the 30 DPS warriors in the raid or whatever it is. Uh,
Yeah, I think it's like much more fun to like play to win in TBC than it is in vanilla, right? Like in
yeah, to
vanilla,
play
it's
the
more like
meters. Yeah,
right. Like in vanilla, you kind of just you play to parse, and that's that. But in TBC, you can play to win, and I think it's a lot more fun, like to play in that way.
that's a good. I like that phrasing. That's a good way to state it. So like we've been talking about Felmyst 4 coming out, and they haven't launched or stated a particular launch date other than like sometime this summer. But I don't know. I guess I don't know for sure if you share this suspicion, but my suspicion is later this summer means June 21st because that's when Felmyst 1 and Felmyst 3 have both launched. So
Or do you mean July 21st?
oh yeah, sorry. Yes,
Yeah.
July 21st.
Hmm.
So I think they maybe like that date for whatever reason, and that they might not necessarily like stick to it if something comes up for them. I don't know what other work they need to put in, but
Hmm.
I just I don't know. I think for tradition's sake, that's a reasonable expectation that they might launch on that day again. I don't know. Were you thinking something similar?
Yeah, I definitely think late July or really anytime in August. I think like July 21st is definitely, I mean, they do have a history of launching realms on July 21st. I think it also, I mean, I think July 19th as well could be a solid date because, I mean, Gummy stated in the more recent years he has a big boy job now, I'm sure. He'd like to launch it on a weekend and take as little PTO days as possible or as little time off work as possible. I don't know if he's planning on doing that this time. I'm pretty sure he did for Felmist 3, take some time away from
Yeah,
real life
it
responsibilities, but
it is interesting. Gummy seems like he's going to be less involved with this project. Like he's still going to be around and be a resource for things that might need to, like bugs that might still exist that might need to be fixed. Or I don't know how much of Tier 6 is fully scripted as far as Black Temple and Hyjal. I think it is mostly done. At the end of Felmus 2, it was pretty much all tested. Uh, but like as far as beyond that, like ZA and Sunwell, I don't know. I think those are things that would need to be implemented. But like fortunately, the way Gummy has things set up, he can usually adjust fights like that and get them working accurately pretty quickly because of I don't know. He's kind of the way he has spells working. It's just kind of easier and quicker for him to make those adjustments
yeah.
without introducing game crashing bugs into the game, which is nice. Um, but uh, but yeah, I think that this it sounds like the community manager this time around, Fanadin, is going to mostly be the kind of front facing person for the server and the main person that people who I don't know might have ideas, suggestions, or other kind of constructive criticism might be the person that we're engaged with more than Gummy this time around, which is probably good because like you said, Gummy has other things in his life that he might be focusing on now, which is that's great for him. But kind of along with that, this time around, Felmyst 4 is going to have uh, something different going on that was hinted at and actually just announced. I guess it was yesterday. It was Friday that this announcement got made. I don't know, Abap, do you want to do you want to tell us what it's going to be?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they announced yesterday on June 14th that the new realm Skull Crusher would be the first realm to ban all add-ons. So no add-ons allowed on Skull Crusher.
Yeah, it's an interesting choice for sure. And they talked about why Gummy and Fanadin, I think, were on a YouTube video where they talked about why that's going to be the case. And their argument basically is that add-ons do a lot to make the game easier, and that they also um, are not necessarily something that were as widely spread during TBC, during when the game was actually live, versus today. And I think that is, both points of those, with no other information, are fair points to make. Add-ons definitely do a lot to make the game easier to parse and play, and especially when it comes to raids, where raid timers can be integrated into an add-on like weak auras, and you can get alerts down to like the second of where you need to be or things you need to react to. And rather than actually like looking at what the boss is doing, you're just kind of reading text and or images on your screen, and reacting accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
Which right does make the game a lot easier. You can react
For
faster.
sure.
It's really dumbing things down. It actually makes me think of this documentary that somebody on YouTube made. I don't know if you've seen this. This is a tangent I wasn't really expecting, but it's called "It's Rude to Be Bad at World of Warcraft." I don't know. Have you?
No, I've never seen it.
All right, I'll send this to you later, and you can watch it. And maybe we can talk about it
Yeah.
on a future podcast. But the basic idea is that if you're in a group and you're not like doing your job, people are mad at you because like you're kind of like letting down like your end of the social contract. But it is kind of like, it's supposed to be a game, but like people take it. I don't know. Um, we can, like I said, we can talk about that more later. But it's an
Mm-hmm.
interesting documentary for sure. Uh, but yeah, like if you don't have add-ons, right, and you're playing worse because of it, like people are gonna think bad things about you. They're not gonna want you in their group. So if everyone's gonna be on that same kind of footing of like people are playing without add-ons at all, I don't know, that would be interesting. Um, and I think that I don't know. What's interesting though is they're not just targeting those add-ons that are specifically for, I don't know, like raid or boss encounters, right? They are
Mm-hmm.
targeting every add-on in the game. And like there are add-ons that do things that um I don't know, like have since add-ons, or I don't know, as the game has progressed, like now are just default part of the game, right? Like the raid
Right.
frames that we see in modern World of Warcraft and in classic World of Warcraft, those are based on add-ons that players developed, because the default raid frames are pretty gnarly. Um, I don't know. What are your thoughts about this event?
Yeah, I think I mean, I actually agree with like their overarching like philosophy. I think there's two really good examples I think from Classic where this is true, like the sentiment that like players are carried by add-ons. I think you look at add-ons like weak auras where specifically like the Foji weak aura packs that everyone's used since TBC now, that essentially just tell you exactly what to do, how to react to each boss mechanic, um, right on your screen, and it's I don't know, it basically pilots your character for you. I think that's a good example of like an add-on that does too much. And another one a lot of people are familiar with is Rested XP. I mean, like it's nothing new to like follow a guide to level, but I think that one is a little too much. I think most people would agree that like weak auras and Rested XP, I don't know. It just like it basically you don't even have to think about anything when you're rating or leveling. You can essentially just follow the arrow or react to what your add-on tells you, and I think those are a little too much. I don't think anyone would disagree that players are carried, especially in raids, by weak auras and leveling by Rested XP. Um,
Yeah, one thing that makes WoW kind of a fun game is their, like, I don't know, you can get better at hitting your buttons, right? But kind of up into a point, I don't know. There are some people that like they're super focused on parsing and like make really good decisions, and they know fights backwards and forwards, and like they can eke out that like 99% parse every time consistently. And it's like, whoa, like you're a gamer for sure. But like the the gain that's getting you is so minimal versus like just being able to play at like a baseline competent level,
mhm,
in far of like as far as like being successful in the raid or not, or like winning the raid. But is you can kind of bring your game knowledge in, right? Like I know on this
mhm,
boss, like this is how these mechanics work, and add-ons like Rested XP and Weak Auras, they kind of just, you don't need to know about the game, right? Like you don't need to have these things memorized because it's just going to tell you exactly what to do.
Yeah.
And that's the part of the game that I think like getting better at it as a player um, really is like fun. Where like, well, because I've been playing the game for so long, I know how these things work, or I know that it's important to do these quests in this order while I'm leveling, which like leveling is definitely part of the game. Being able to level fast is like a fun perk that you have if you're kind of a player that's invested in playing the game long enough.
Yeah, it's one
Um,
of my favorite things is the
yeah,
leveling.
and yeah, with Rested XP, like your knowledge doesn't matter anymore because everyone has
Exactly.
access to this baseline thing. And yeah, like there is something substantially different in following a guide where like you have to read and like figure stuff out and interpret versus just like, yeah, like I'm gonna walk here and do this, and like it really kind of takes you out of the game more so than like yeah, those other methods do, at least in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. I will say, like, I think like removing add-ons, I don't know, for players like me and you, like the game's not necessarily going to be any harder for veterans of the game. I think like veterans will shine more without add-ons compared to, newer players without add-ons, but
Yeah.
I think, I don't know, in my opinion, I think it's going to like deter newer players from trying to play without add-ons. Um but I don't know. It's going to be interesting. I think.
I think it does make some things more difficult, even for a veteran player. Like seeing someone being affected by a debuff is a lot
Mhm.
harder with the base raid UI. I think that a
Oh, for
role,
sure.
I think that a role like a healer is really going to be a lot more challenging when you're having to use those default raid frames, which are terrible.
Mhm.
Somebody in response to, there are a lot of responses to this announcement made the other day, but one of the ones that really resonated with me is that the reason that the default raid frames are so bad is because people had the ability to make add-ons, right? Like Blizzard, even during TBC, at some point would have invested time and resources into making better raid frames if add-ons weren't out there and available for people to fix this problem on their own. Um,
Mhm.
and like part of the selling point of World of Warcraft is like, hey, we have this API which allows people to go in and like create some cool things and customize. And that was something that I don't know. This is like some kind of MMO history that other games hadn't really had as an option, and it was kind of revolutionary. So like saying that this blanket statement that all add-ons are bad and doing these things, like that's definitely not necessarily fair. Like I think that the add-ons make a role like healing a whole lot better. I
Mhm.
um Things like threat and DPS meters, I am kind of like on the fence about because like there's no good way, right? You could be the best player. There's no good way to know when you're going to pull threat versus what the tank's doing because you can't see the tank's screen. And even if they're like communicating with you, like, oh, like, my threat's pretty good or my threat's low, without that like threat meter, like you don't have a good sense for that. And there's a reason like later on, um, some threat indicators were added to the game by default. So
Yeah, I think it was like by Wrath they added just
yeah, by Wrath it
Wrath
was
to the
just
tooltip.
on the tooltip, right? And like the little like floating health bar above the mob would glow too, I think, and give you that indicator. So I I mean, I don't know. I think that there are ways to play around a lot of stuff, but there's also like it would be nice if there was a way for them to be like, okay, like unit frame add-ons, those are okay because like the stock unit frames are pretty trash. Um and I don't know. There's some other examples. Like people really are used to their bar add-ons or their bag add-ons, and like those are things that aren't giving you an unfair advantage as far as gameplay. So I don't know. What do you think about stuff like that? That's not directly impacting the way people play the game.
Yeah, it definitely worries me. Like I think but I would personally be on board with like breaking like weak auras, DBM, like raid assisting add-ons.
Hmm.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah,
Even threat meters and DPS meters, like sure. But I it does concern me a little bit about the no raid frames. I just think it's gonna I don't know, no one's gonna want to play a healer, and it concerns me that we're not gonna have literally any healing players on Skull Crusher.
yeah. Finding a good healer was tough on Felmyst 3. There were like a couple of them that I'd want to group with, and everyone else was like, uh, I don't know. They were either learning the game or I don't know what was going on. But
Yeah.
but uh, but yeah. And my suspicion is why they've just made it this blanket policy on all add-ons. It's like maybe for like one of two reasons, or potentially it's both of these. I think on the one hand, it is tough to like distinguish like what add-on a player is using. Like maybe they can tell if like someone's using an add-on at all, but knowing like, oh, it's this one versus this other one, that could be hard and like an
Right.
undue burden on the staff to like be able to check, if there's a
Yeah.
few hundred people playing, like who's using what. And then the other
I definitely think it's
like,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other thing it could be is like just from management's perspective, it's like, well, if we're gonna allow some, then all of a sudden we've got to litigate every single add-on, right? And like, because so maybe they can track specific ones and be like, these ones aren't okay. But then it's gonna be like, well, what about this version of the add-on, or what about this? And people could write their own add-ons, and pretty soon people are maybe sidestepping the entire point of disabling those particular boss or raid add-ons that are so impactful. So to avoid that burden on the staff of having to like be the arbiter in all those situations, they are just saying like, hey, no, none of them, um,
Mm-hmm.
which is too bad. I wonder if they could like put out specific add-ons and have a way for like players to track those. Like maybe there's like a Felmyst version of decursive, for example, or a Felmyst version of raid frames that like are really like customizable and like would do what people needed them to do. And then on their end, they would be able to tell like, oh, hey, like this is our approved add-on. Like that's okay. Um, I don't know.
Yeah.
They really don't want people modifying the game at all, though. They said like even stuff like right now on the screen, I'm playing with like a field of view fix, which makes it so that my resolution, it's like it's widescreen. It's actually not stretched out. It's actually like gives me kind of some extra vision on the side, and it's things like that. I'm not sure they would be okay with either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't know. I think they seem pretty adamant about this change. I would hope that they would reconsider some things like raid frames. And I think like the solution or the possible solution that you gave is probably one of the best possible solutions, like just having their own versions of add-ons that are acceptable and not even like other add-ons. I mean, honestly, with just raid frames, I think that would solve the main issue with the TBC client.
Yeah,
Um,
I would be a fan of some kind of meter, at least for threat. I would like to see a DPS meter personally, because I think what people will end up doing is like they can't tell us we can't log, right? So like I think people would end up using a logging site to look at people's damage numbers, and just forcing people to like go through that hoop and like look outside of the game um is frustrating. Um and yeah, I don't know, like it would be nice if we could just do that in game, because like you do want to be able to coach players, or I don't know. It's good, it gets back to this, right? It's rude to be bad at World of Warcraft. You do want to be able to kind of fix problems. um
hmm
and if you can't see what people are doing and have that conversation, then like I don't know, it's going to create social pressure in a negative way, which is probably bad for the game. um I don't know. But yeah, then the one thing that I personally would be really sad to see go is probably an add-on like power auras, which is like the precursor to weak auras. And I know it's funny because we just talked about like maybe the negative impact weak auras has, but like uh Power Auras is basically like a buff and debuff tracker, and what it lets you do is see kind of uh, with images in the center of your screen what your current buffs and debuffs are. So like, if I get a clear casting proc, rather than having to like look up in the corner of my screen or listen for a sound, I get a visual of that. Which, yes, like helps me play my character better and react faster. But I think, right, like having to look at those small like little indicators for something that's that important to the play of my character, it would be really, I would be bummed to not have that, just because I would feel like I'm playing a really uh I don't know, underpowered version of my character compared to what it normally could be, which is just kind of a feels bad. And it's not like, I don't know, I don't see that as like something that's giving me an unfair advantage. It's just like helping me play my character the way it was meant to be played, type thing. I don't
Hmm.
know. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I don't know, for a lot of like smaller quality of life add-ons, it's kind of a shame that we wouldn't be able to use them. Like for example, I want to play an arms warrior, so like
Mhm.
no weapon swing timer means what? I'm gonna have to set a metronome or something and count to 3.5 between every swing so I can line up my slam cast.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh man, I didn't think about stuff like that. I don't know. Do you think, is there a macro solution to that? Like steady shot for hunters?
I don't think so. I mean, I've never
I don't
heard of
know.
a macro solution for that. I think like I don't know, the solutions I thought of in my head are like a literal metronome at 60 BPM
Yeah, but even that, right?
or
As soon as you like have to stop swinging for a second, you'd have to like reset it in the middle
yeah,
of the, yeah. I don't know. That is kind of a
exactly.
mess. And like you can't even go based off the floating combat text in the game because like that's delayed, right? That doesn't actually
Hmm.
tell you when your swing's coming in.
Or
Um,
like your animation's delayed. Like it's
yeah.
not
Yeah,
with
yeah.
your
So
swing.
like yeah, in order to play certain classes, like Shadow Priest is one that people on the forums have brought up a lot, where it's like the dots all like have different like durations, and I don't know, like that would be a class without some kind of dot tracking or like timer that you could set up with the help of an add-on, right? Like a macro by itself isn't going to do that. um,
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know. There would definitely be some problems to solve. It'll be interesting to see if they're gonna keep the hard line or if they're gonna maybe allow for some things. I don't know. You kind of said like you don't expect them to, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, the way that they've responded to like feedback is pretty hard line that they're adamant about no add-ons. So that's what kind of what I expect them to follow through with, but
Yeah, me
I
too.
hope that they're open to like some more discussion and constructive feedback. I mean, I think a lot of the feedback I've seen is that players are kind of okay with a lot of add-ons being taken away, but that like raid frames specifically are
Yeah,
kind of a necessity. I mean, players back in 2007 didn't even play with stock unit frames and raid frames.
yeah.
Um,
If you were like really, I mean, back in TBC, most players weren't getting into tier 5 until like they basically attunements were removed, right? Until uh like ZA, I think was probably like when, I think on most servers like people were like an average player was clearing tier 5. Like if you weren't in a super competitive guild, you weren't clearing tier 5, and you probably weren't in tier 6 while the attunements were in.
mhm.
So I don't know. I would be interested to hear if people had a differing opinion from that. But that was, I mean, I played on a few different servers, and that's what I saw pretty by and large. Um, and yeah, like everyone who is in that situation who was like doing those more challenging fights, they were definitely all playing with add-ons installed, and probably like a significant amount of add-ons. So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it would make things a lot more difficult. And but yeah, there are just, it would be nice for some things for sure. uh I hope they entertain the conversation, because I think that if they don't, it's very right that the people who are still playing World of Warcraft, right, a lot of people are have moved on with their life and are playing other games or doing other things, but the people who still enjoy this game are the people who enjoy add-ons as like being a part of the game, right? That's part of that game knowledge thing that I was talking about earlier. Is like
Hmm.
setting up your macros and add-ons correctly and setting up your key bindings. I saw somebody make a joke about, the next thing they're going to remove is the ability to bind your keys.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, that would be ridiculous, but like the reason it's funny is because it's like it feels just as bad as getting rid of all add-ons. It's like, yeah, removing those key bindings. So I,
Right.
I don't know. Well, yeah, I don't know if we have anything else to really go over for this episode. That was kind of the big topic of discussion. How are you feeling with things, ABAP?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I want to see how things play out. I'm definitely gonna play, whether it be, to play things at max content or just to level. I don't know. I guess we'll see how the population is.
So,
I mean,
so you're
like,
kind of looking at playing. Are you gonna like be organizing something, or I don't know? Is there something that you want to talk about as
yeah,
far as that goes?
for sure. Yeah, I've definitely been thinking about starting a guild, but just from like the people I've talked to, I don't know. Just like all the healers I've talked to, I don't know if they're gonna play without raid frames, just to be honest. But
Yeah, and it's frustrating because you're talking about people who like you trust to like
right.
to be able to handle the challenge of Felmyst, and yeah, those are the players that we're talking about, right? Those are the players that are just so used to having some quality of life add-ons, uh, and yeah, it's challenging. My initial reaction was probably a whole lot more negative than what I'm talking about today, but like, yeah, I don't know. It's definitely would be different. It'll be interesting to see.
Hmm. I
Yeah,
I definitely would love to raid on Felmus and see tier 5. But I mean, at the end of the day, it just all comes down to if there's a population to sustain a raiding environment, and I don't know. I guess we'll see how it plays out. But I definitely I don't know. I have something in the works for sure to like make a guild, but we'll just see how much interest there is, I guess, if we're gonna go through with it or not.
yeah. Okay. Well, that's cool. I really appreciate you coming on and talking with me, and maybe we'll have some more information to share in the future. This might not be the last episode. We'll see.
For sure. Yeah, thanks
Hopefully,
for having me on. I enjoy talking about TBC. It's definitely my favorite version of WoW, and it's awesome.
cool, cool, cool. All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. If you made it this far, I'm pretty impressed. I don't know how many listeners we're gonna get, but yeah, we'll see how it goes. We'll see what's for the future of TBC. Maybe we'll be talking about TBC Classic season sometime in the future without phases. That'd be great.